Hi guys, Nick Callow here from Haters Tea for a very special Arsenal interview around the news that Andrea Berta is the new sporting director at Arsenal, replacing Edu, who departed in November last year. I remember I was in Milan at the time covering the Inter Milan Champions League game. Managed to catch up with Richard Garlick, the managing director at the time, then to discuss the situation. He was saying, don't panic, don't panic. We've got this all in hand. I'm here, Jason Atu's here, Mikel's here. It's all going to be okay. And if we have to wait until next summer, even, and we're in March now, going into April, as I speak here in Arsenal country, North London, then we will wait that long to get the right man. And it seems to me that Andrea Berta has got the best CV for the job in the whole footballing world. And only time will tell as to whether he is successful or not. But let's say Arsenal give themselves the best chance to find out about Andrea Berta, the person, his pedigree, and what he really will bring to Arsenal, and he really will bring to the Premier League and the Champions League and beyond. I have been very fortunate to be able to catch up with Tom Canton. Tom Canton is the Arsenal correspondent for Football London and has the brilliant daily football podcast, video, YouTube show, The Gooner Talk, 8 o'clock every morning. I never miss it. And therefore, I never miss anything that's going on about Arsenal because Tom is over every aspect of the club. So yeah, Tom was very kind to sit down with us and share some Andrea Berta knowledge with us. This is how it went. I hope you enjoy it. From what I know of Andrea Berta, he's got the best CV of anyone out there to replace Edu and take Arsenal through into the summer window and beyond. Contracts and all sorts of other things to sort out, of course, as well. But the way I like to start my morning, the way I like to start my day every day is to get on to the Gooner Talk. Gooner Talk. Sorry, Tom, a little bit nervous speaking to such a great man with you. Not nervous. I just get overexcited about Andrea Berta. It's just to start my day with Tom Canton and the Gooner Talk because he will tell you everything that's happening in the Arsenal world and a little bit more from his own personal insight covering the club 24/7 as he does. Tom, thanks very much for joining us. I'll just cut straight to the chase. Andrea Berta, nothing that's particularly surprising about the news that he's in, but interesting appointment. You know, what do you make of it, and what can you tell us about the man from Italy who's come in via Spain and what have you?
Yeah, it's quite an un-Arsenal type of appointment. It's not really who I would have expected when the news dropped that Edu was leaving. If you'd have asked me, who do you think it would be? I would have thought it would have been, another person that was probably heavily involved with Arsenal in a former life. That's why when kind of we heard about like Thomas Rosicky, for instance, being considered, that I thought, oh, that makes a lot of sense. But Andrea Berta is a man who really wasn't on anyone's radar in kind of the last couple of months or so after Edu's resignation. And of course, that's mainly because when Edu resigned, he was still in a job with Atletico Madrid at the end of 2024. And his appointment at Arsenal, I think, stands out as a little bit of a marker, actually. I think it's a bit of a statement type of appointment from the club. And it's encouraging that, somebody of Berta's caliber is looking at Arsenal as his next step after leaving another club who he's won, untold numbers of trophies with and competed with the likes of Barcelona and Real Madrid and beaten them to the likes of La Liga on a couple of occasions while being with Atleti, with Diego Simeone as a coach there. So I think it's exciting. I don't necessarily think it's like the guy that confirms Arsenal are going to be title winners next year or whatever. It's there's a lot that still needs to happen after this, but it's definitely a step that I think is a very positive one for the club.
Yeah, it's not as if he's a centre forward who scores 30 goals a
Exactly.
season. But it's funny, isn't it? The whole sporting director thing is quite an interesting. I mean, to me, it's still quite a relatively new sort of phenomenon in football, and Arsene Wenger was very wary and quite anti having someone working alongside him, and that might have even hastened his departure. But now, just the complexity of the modern game, the number of players and squads, the contracts, and all the other things that need addressing, it's impossible for one man just to have that total control of running a club. And we've now seen, and I think most people agree that Edu did a fantastic job. Um, it helped, I guess, that he was an Arsenal invincible, part of that invincible championship winning team. And it helped that he got a great chemistry with Mikel Arteta. I think it's good that there's a new voice in the club to sort of challenge Mikel and just challenge the whole way that Arsenal have been going in the last 5 years. Not to say that it's been anything other than pretty much up. Um, and it seems to me he's got the pedigree to take Arsenal forward as well. From my understanding, a lot of the summer transfer targets, a lot of the contract targets for going into the summer and to next season are pretty much firmly inked in on where what the club want to do. What would you assess as Andrea Berta's sort of to-do list when he starts work as soon, well, in the very, very near future?
Yeah, I think when a sporting director comes in, a lot of fans want to kind of see what gems are they going to find, what targets are they going to suggest as a way forwards, and you start looking at kind of the work that they've done at their former club to try and realise what Arsenal could do. But you're right, Arsenal have done a lot of work already, for the summer window that began with the end of Edu's tenure and some of the work that he was doing. That carried on with Jason Ato, who took on the interim sporting director position while Edu was, out on gardening leave, as he's kind of seeing out his contract with the club. And Berta comes in with Arsenal's summer pretty much in place about what they want to do. Certainly, a lot of the key profile targets we're aware of. We know that Martin Zubimendi of Real Sociedad is a big one for the midfield. We know that Juan Garcia, the Espanyol goalkeeper, is another one for the backup position behind David Raya as a more long-term solution to that exit of Aaron Ramsdale last summer. And of course, we know that the centre forward and wide areas are areas that Arsenal also want to target, with Alexander Isak being a player that Arsenal would love, but I think will probably still be gazumped in terms of his price tag in the summer. But that then leads you back to a player in Benjamin Sesko, who the club looked at last summer and have stayed very much intrigued on and scouted and followed this season as he's had another progressive year. And then the wide positions, you look at a player like Nico Williams, for example, at Athletic Club, who we know Arteta is a very, very big fan of, has a release clause that is attainable as well, like Zubimendi does for Arsenal. And I think that those areas are going to be, what Arsenal look to try and attack during this window. I think where Berta's kind of where we might see some of his identity and personality stamped is if they can't get some of their priority business done, how do they then pivot to other potential targets? Is there going to be a Berta influence on that type of business? For me, I think this window is just for him about getting the job that we needed done. And it's not about identifying gems. That'll come later on down the line in future windows where Berta can really have an influence there. This summer is just about getting the players in the year. You don't need to be the best sporting director in the world to know who the top striker targets are on the market. You and I know who, those players are. The listeners know who those players are. So you don't need to be being paid hundreds of millions a year or whatever to identify who those players are, because they're the best. And Arsenal are in a category of club now where they're looking to try and get those players. The money is earned by the people in these positions by being able to get those deals done. So that is what he is tasked with.
He's had a sort of I was talking about Edu and his sort of pedigree as a Brazil international midfielder and Arsenal. I mean, there are bigger legends than Edu as player, but he was part of one of the greatest, if not the greatest, Arsenal team in recent memory. Berta's had a very different route into where he's into the game and where he's got to his status today, hasn't he? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's he's obviously not got the pedigree from kind of a playing perspective whatsoever. He's certainly got more of the legal side of things. And I know that Arsenal fans won't want to hear about another lawyer type, entering the club, but obviously his pedigree from working, with Italian sides as well before getting the opportunity to work at Atletico Madrid and with Diego Simeone showcases that track record, that resume of success. And Arsenal fans will be or want to know more about his last job because that has the greatest bearing, I think, on what we can expect. I think a lot of Arsenal fans are asking, well, why is he at Arsenal now? Because that means he must have left his last club for another reason. What's the reason behind him leaving that club as well? But kind of just starting at the beginning, he was more so about recruitment at Atletico, technical director role, then did so well that he was promoted into that sporting director role there, following some time with some Italian clubs, as I mentioned. But he spent, the better part of 12 years plus in Spain. Obviously, a good language to learn as well when you're in this sphere of trying to speak to clubs around the world. He's got that Italian language. He's been learning English, to my understanding, as well, for quite some time. And his work with Diego Simeone saw Atletico go through kind of a roller coaster of squad recruitment and strategy because we assume that Atleti are always typically this club that are an industrious, physical team that can frustrate opposition sides, have frustrated us in the Europa League. People
Yeah,
remember, of course, as well. And are kind of the antithesis to like Barcelona, for instance. They're the complete opposite. People think of them that. But Atleti have gone through periods where they've had and wanted to try and evolve and go to a new level. So they started to sign players like Thomas Lemar and Joao Felix, for instance, and tried to go to a more technical level of forward rather than the Diego Costas that had previously seen have saw them have so much success. And Berta was always kind of a big part of that with Simeone, but when it didn't really work out, Lamar and Felix eventually, despite they won the league with Felix in his first season, but that was more down to Luis Suarez being there, kind of bailing them out, if you like, towards the end of the campaign where they were really holding on to that lead as Real and Barcelona tried to close the gap that they'd opened up so greatly in the first half of the season. But Felix obviously dropped off kind of after that and has been a bit of a journeyman at other clubs in the time since, whereas Lamar has really fallen away and been nowhere near you'll remember the crazy 100 million near offer that Arsenal put in from when he was at Monaco at one point. And he's just not been that kind of player. But they've then signed players like Kieran Trippier, for instance, who had a really good spell with Atleti, playing a right back role that, wasn't typically what you'd have come to associate with Esime Vasalka, was also there in that position as well. We know the big names that have been there, like Antoine Griezmann, who left for Barcelona and then came back and has continued to be a force, not just for Atleti, but of course for his country and France as well. And those signings that we've seen more recently, like Julian Alvarez, for instance, those signings are considered to be more to do with Simeone and some of the other kind of presences, if you like. And one of that leads me kind of onto why, or kind of the processes by which Berta left Atleti. It wasn't because he like fractured relationships with Diego Simeone. You don't work for 12 years and have a good working relationship with them. Structurally, Atletico Madrid have gone through changes. They've brought in people like Oscar Mayo at a really high level. They've brought in somebody like Carlos Bacero as well there, who has kind of taken on a role where Berta becomes kind of more secondary, if you like, and isn't as influential. And I think that in part has led him to make the decision to take on a new challenge where he can be that big influence again, can be a leading figure in a club's decision making. And the sporting director role at Arsenal, of course, allows you to do that. Fans may ask, well, Edu left because he felt that he couldn't achieve what he wanted to. And while I certainly am aware that there was a financial incentive, to leave for what we assume to be Evangelos Marinakis' Nottingham Forest group of clubs, but it was also the fact that he could be part of a multi-club model there and have that influence and be more of kind of a CEO figure, which was not really on the table at Arsenal. Berta is keen to be a sporting director. He likes that role. He loves doing the business of transfers and things like that, but wants to have kind of a big say. And he will work with Mikel Arteta. And I think that those fans that maybe were worried that we'd bring in the quote unquote yes man kind of type figure, this is not that. And so there should be certainly encouragement about that.
yeah, and we know Mikel's had a say and been involved in the process, but it seems like it's been very much led by Richard Garlick, who I was mentioning earlier, Tim Lewis, sort of board level, and obviously Josh Kroenke has had a big say in that. But it's important that Mikel and him are on board. I mean, Richard Garlick was saying that to me when I managed to have a little chat with him in Milan way back in November. That it's the chemistry between Mikel and whoever comes in is crucial, but above all, above everything, is that we get the right man who has the right pedigree to bring in the right players and just to structure what they want to do, want the sporting director to do. As you say, he will have quite a lot of authority, a big say. I just want to move on if I may. And we talk about the track. I mean, do we? I mean, I don't want to ask three questions in one, but obviously a lot of people are saying, well, if he doesn't sign Isak and Zubamendi and a few other players this summer, then he's useless and stuff. But I guess this summer's a bit too soon to judge him on. But I'm quite interested in the contract side of that. If we can just talk about that. I'll just try and tell this little story quite quickly because it's just uppermost in my mind about how the club has changed and football's evolved. I was with Lee Dixon, some of the old Arsenal legends who were raising some funds and awareness for the new Kevin Campbell Foundation after Kevin sadly passed away not that long ago. And he was talking about how important it was to get Lewis Skelly and Wanyeri and other players, Saliba, Saka, and Gabriel, amongst others, on new deals, and how it's changed since his time and when they were winning the league in '89 and '91, where you just pretty much just spoke to George Graham, and you as a player would go in there knock on the door and say, "Hi, George, can I have a bonus?" He's like, "Get out, son." And he was telling the story back when I think we had won the league for the second time under in that Graham era, 91. He was the first choice England right back. He was the best right back in the country. He was on 1,500 quid a week. That's he wasn't saying it. He wasn't saying that's not bad, terrible money, but he felt
That
like
is football money.
his
Yeah.
his contract was coming out for go for renewal, and he just didn't know quite how to pitch it. And he was on England duty. Tony Dorigo of Leeds was his roommate, and Tony Dorigo was his understudy for England. Leeds at the time were a bit mid-table. Arsenal were the best team in the country, and no one really spoke about wages. It wasn't in the papers. X is on 20 grand a week, 5 grand, 1 grand. And he finally got out of Tony Dorigo. He said, "I've got to go back to see George Grant tomorrow. Talk about my contract." He goes, what's it like at Leeds? What's the money? Yeah, it's okay, it's okay. He goes, "What are you on, if you don't mind?" He goes, "Well, yeah, I'm on 5 grand a week." And he said, and he spat his cup of tea. He goes, "Is that what you're
Yeah.
on at Arsenal?" Goes, yeah, yeah, pretty similar, pretty similar. Next morning, back on the door, George, "Hey, Sonny, here, coming with Lee Dixon, the great England international, to come to impart some wisdom from his international duty. Come on, Lee, come and enlighten me." He goes, "Well, no, no, I just want to talk about my contract, boss." Oh, he goes, "Well, I'm on 1,500. He goes, "Yeah, yeah, yeah, good money, good money." He goes, "Yeah, well, Tony Dorigo at Leeds is on 5 grand." He goes, "Oh, is he? Is he?" And just a pregnant silence. He goes, "Well, what do you think we should do about that, boss?" He goes, "Well, I think if you want 5 grand a week, you better go and get yourself up to Leeds." That's right. He goes, "Is that it?" He goes, "Oh, no, no, one more thing. Shut the door behind you on your way out. I'll see you at training." And that was sort of the negotiation
Yeah.
deal done. And he
I
said
guess that's because
he
it's
said it
like
kept us all hungry to prove ourselves, but
you were paid to be at Arsenal in a way. Like it wasn't just your wage, as being at Arsenal was part of that wage. It was considered
yeah.
to be an absolute honour, whereas in today, it's not the same.
So I mean, how important in the Berta era will be for him to oversee those contract deals, or is that something that is not going to be on his in his sphere? So explain that side of it.
It will certainly be within his sphere. And the three key players that come to mind, of course, are Bukayo Saka, William Saliba, and Gabriel. All those players' contracts currently run through until 2027. And so Arsenal do not like when players' deals kind of run below that 2 year threshold. Unfortunately, while they don't like that, today's game is very much more, as we've just discussed there, more player power than it is club power when it comes to contracts. And we know that there is this lingering link with Real Madrid, particularly with Saliba. We've heard that there's still lingering interest from Saudi clubs in Gabriel. And we know, of course, that Bukayo Saka will forever be wanted by the best clubs in the world because he is one of the best players in the world. I think with Saka, that's one where we can be more confident, certainly, because we know his attachment to Arsenal, having come through the academy, is very strong. And I don't see any issues when it comes to Saka and signing a potential future contract. When it comes to Gabriel, that's quite an interesting one because we know that there's been interest in him in the past from Saudi. He is the oldest one of that kind of group of players as well. And if an offer comes in from a Saudi club that is not just very financially beneficial to him, but also very financially sound for Arsenal, which you can't put past the Saudi clubs because of the financial weight that any offer from them does carry, then it's not like I can sit here and say Gabriel categorically will not move. What I can say is that Arsenal categorically do not want to lose him, and will certainly be turning around and saying that he isn't for sale. But that situation of trying to get him to sign a new contract, isn't necessarily as clear cut, maybe as some might think. But I think that there is still a certain confidence that Gabriel will indeed extend with Arsenal and is still very passionate about Arsenal and loves being at Arsenal. You can see that in how he reacts and how he, really has an attachment with the fans. And I think that's very, very important to him. And it'll be interesting to see how and when that new contract, if and when it does happen, does happen. Saliba, as I mentioned, Real Madrid have this way of kind of seeing players run down their deals. We've seen it with Trent Alexander-Arnold most recently. We've seen it with players like Kylian Mbappe. And when we're in these situations, Arsenal, in my view, have to be just as in control as they possibly can, which is not easy. And what I mean by that is I think for somebody like Berta, it will be his job, I think, to if there is or basically get kind of a feel of the situation firstly and understand where Williams' head's at, where his representatives' heads are at, where they see their future, what they see as their kind of long-term plan. Is there a desire for them to play for Real Madrid? If that desire is there and that's always going to be there, Arsenal really cannot allow Saliba to leave without getting a significant amount of money in for him and hopefully not fall into the same kind of situation that Liverpool have with Trent. And that is, again, still very much out of their control because you're reliant upon offers coming in for Saliba. Now, you'd hope that that would happen for a player of his caliber, but Real Madrid will be savvy enough to know that maybe if they wait a couple of years, they can get this player for absolutely nothing. And so, therefore, if they've got assurances from a player, and I'm not saying that's what's happening, just hypothetically, if they have assurances from a player that they will wait and will see out their deal, then Real Madrid have shown to be very patient. I think Arsenal have to be as careful as possible, as shrewd as possible, and say if a club like PSG, who have also been linked with Saliba, were to come in for him, say in 2026 or even this summer, I think they've got to try and leverage interest in Saliba to help that situation as best they can. But when I asked Saliba myself in a press conference recently, he said he was happy at the club and he wanted to continue. So I think it's 50-50 on Saliba. And that's the one I'm the least certain of.
That was a great question when you asked him that, and to be fair, he'd answered it quite directly and said he was very happy. I love Arsenal. He had
Yeah.
Arsenal as a kid, but what does that mean? You're making it actually sound quite worrying now. I thought you were going to say,
I'm
yeah,
sorry. I can't. I don't want to. I don't want to give fans a sense of like, oh, he's good. Yeah, he loves the club. He's definitely going to stay because we don't know that for certain, and we've seen it before happen. With other players, so you can never be 100% sure.
so do you think it'd be more straightforward with the young guns, Ethan Wanyeri and Mars Lewis Skelly?
Yes, I do think with those guys, a 5-year contract, you would be looking and feeling that that is the next step for both Miles and Ethan to commit to and to take that next step in their careers from what were, scholarships and professional pro contracts to now, the proper first senior contract for both of them, which
Yeah.
I don't think Burton needs to do much, I think, to convince them to stay.
Yeah, so so just finally, Tom, I know when I spoke to you sort of first thing this morning when we knew this news about Andrea Berta being confirmed was sort of in the air and we heard it was most likely to happen and you said you'd kindly spare 10 minutes or so of your precious time, well, I asked you to. And we spoke for quite a long time, but it's been sort of fascinating stuff. I think there's just one more aspect of the Andrea Berta sort of arrival that I'd like to hear things about from you is players departing this summer. That's an important part of balancing the books and the budget and the size and the shape of the squad. I think he's got quite a good track record at Atletico Madrid of moving players on and them getting money back or getting players out of the club. Will Berta and Arteta, well, they've got the same names almost, haven't they? But Arteta be looking to get quite a few players out as well this summer.
Yeah, I think that there will be interest in a fair few of Arsenal's players. We've talked about some of the ones that we don't want to lose, like Gabriel, for instance. But I think there will be others as well, like Jakub Kivior, who I think there'll be interest. We know that there's been interest in him from Italy in the past, Germany as well. Same can be said about Zinchenko. We know Borussia Dortmund. Certainly, I've been made aware that Borussia Dortmund were very keen on him in the summer, but were ultimately, I think, priced out of a move for him. But that may change this summer. I think Zinchenko, based on the limited gains, he's actually had a pretty decent season, to be honest, for his money, and so that will only help when it comes to trying to move him on. We know that Jorginho and Partey are both. Well, at this point in time, we're expecting them both to leave on free contracts. There's been no indication that those two will be extending. So it does leave Arsenal. It does leave Arsenal a bit light in midfield because Zinni has played a little bit in midfield as well this season off the back of some injuries within the squad. And then you've got somebody like I think Gabriel Jesus, who we may have expected to have been sold, but because of his injury situation, probably won't be. I think that there is a chance that you could see a bit of a surprise exit from Arsenal this summer. I think that you may look at somebody like Leandro Trossard or Gabriel Martinelli. Either of those two, I think, are the most likely shock kind of exits. I'd still put it at kind of a low percentage, but if Arsenal are interested in, say, a Nico Williams, for example, are those two going to be happy with a much more diminished role than what they have right now if Arsenal go for a marquee left-sided forward? Uh, the most likely of the two, I think, would be Trossard. We know there was interest in him from Saudi at the end of the last window. We know that his contract situation is ongoing, and we don't know whether or not Arsenal are gonna be able to agree a new deal. Certainly, I think he'd probably want an increase in wages for this contract that he would sign, and we don't know what those demands are. And we know that Saudi can offer you very good wages indeed. And I'd hope that if they did say, for instance, hypothetically sell Trossard, that they'd get the majority of the £27 million that they paid for Brighton back with a deal like that. And it could end up being quite a good move for Arsenal to get, effectively what they paid for a player 2, 3 years ago, straight back again for a player who's now into his 30s. So I think that is the area where you could maybe see a surprise exit. And if that's the case, Berta, as you've mentioned, has got a pretty good track record when it comes to, sales. He got a good fee for a pretty poor Joao Felix at the time that he left the club to go to Chelsea. He got good feedback for Arthur Vermeeren, despite the fact that he only joined the club, very soon after that. He's obviously sold players in the past like Mateus Cunha to Wolves for a very, very good fee as well, upwards of £40 million they got in for him. And Atleti don't tend to like seeing players leave on the cheap. They forced Arsenal into having to pay the release clause of Thomas Partey before he left the club as well. They got a massive fee from Barcelona for Antoine Griezmann, of course, well over £100 million
Oh, no.
for him. And Lucas Hernandez as well. They went to Bayern Munich as well. They got a very, very good fee for him. So, and Rodri, who went to Manchester City, of course, as well. They got a good fee also. So I think you're looking at those and saying, Edu started to change the reputation of Arsenal sales in his last season with Eddie Nketiah and Ramsdale and Smith Rowe. Got really good sale value for those players. There are others, of course, during his tenure as well that we did quite well to get decent money for. So I think that Berta will be aiming to continue that trend, and you'd be hoping to get some decent money for the players that we've listed there.